Today I wanted to make a video talking to you about the fiction books that I read in the month of December. I read 27 books in total in the month of December. A good chunk of those were graphic novels and poetry collections, which if you're interested in hearing me talk about, I will link the relevant part 1 of this December wrap-up in the cards. But for my own sanity, and likely for yours, when I read that many books in a month, I generally like to split up my wrap-ups into 2 parts so that I'm not stuck editing and you're not stuck watching an hour-long video. But like I said, in this video we're going to talk about the fiction books that I read in the month of December. If you like talking about books, if you like hearing people talk about books, and you end up enjoying this video, feel free to subscribe and we can all talk about books together. The way that I generally like to structure these videos is talking about the books that I enjoyed the least and working up to the books that I enjoyed the most. Now, December was a really good reading month for me, just numbers wise, but also the number of 5-star reads that I had this month. I don't know if I've ever had this many 5-star reads in a single month, so a lot of these books that I read and I'm going to tell you about are ones that I really adored. So with that, let's start off with Picnic at Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsay. This was originally published in Australia in 1967, has become an Australian classic, and is set in 1900 Australia at an elite Australian girls' boarding school where a number of the girls and one of their teachers go missing on a school outing. They all take a picnic to Hanging Rock on St. Valentine's Day, and some of them do not return. This book is very much a slow burn. The mystery of the disappearances are never really solved. It's more of a look at the effects that this event has on the wider community, and is also a close character study of some of the people that were involved in the event or were impacted by the event. There are certainly aspects of this book that I could really appreciate the drawn out tension of the events of this book and its sort of fracturing effect on a number of the people in the community. The contrast of Australia's harsh and wild landscapes in comparison with the British European colonizers and their Victorian sensibilities and sense of morality. With this book, Joan Lindsay seeks to create a gothic consciousness of something deeply unnoble and terrifying in the Australian landscape. Like I said, as a reader, I could definitely see and appreciate a lot of the themes and motifs that Lindsay was working with. However, as a lover of gothic lit, I kind of wish that some of these themes and motifs had been played with a little bit more or taken a little bit farther. I think the way that I would describe it is I wish that the saturation dial of the events and the gothic themes and the conversations around the disappearance of these young girls had been turned up a notch or two. It wasn't really until the final chapters of this book that I felt like I was really getting the kind of intensity and gothic themes and events I'd kind of been craving for most of the book. I'm also going to throw in a modern critique of this classic, and that is that the author has a bad habit of codifying the quote-unquote morally good characters as being inherently attractive in a very specific way, and their physical and mental statures being an inherent reflection on their moral superiority, their goodness. They all also, for the most part, come from very affluent backgrounds. I think a clear example of this can be seen with the contrast of the character of Edith, who is the school dunce. The author's descriptions of her physical appearance, her weight, her family's social background, her level of attractiveness, or in this case, her unattractiveness, are shown as reasons for her low mental acuity and her kind of dubious moral standings, whereas the girls who go missing are the quote-unquote golden girls of this school, beautiful by society's standards as well as white European standards, intelligent, socially promising, and they're all from incredibly wealthy backgrounds. At the end of the day, I'm glad that I read this bit of Australian literature and watched the very famous movie adaptation of it. For the most part, I think I did my best to try and appreciate it for what it was. But at the end of the day, I don't think I could say that I fully enjoyed it. It left me feeling a little bit wanting, a little bit unsatisfied. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next, let's talk about The Winter People by Joseph Bruchac. I have been on a Joseph Bruchac kick this year ever since the Good and Readathon, where I picked up his duology, The Skeleton Man. He is an Abenaki writer, scholar, and tribal historian, and he writes a lot of fiction, including a lot of middle grade, that deals with a lot of Indigenous themes and stories and myths, and I've just been really enjoying his work. So I picked up this one from my library. This book is a middle grade historical fiction set in 1750s Canada, where we follow 14-year-old Saxo when British soldiers attack his Abenaki village. This story takes place during the 5 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, I think more so in the States, where the Abenaki Abenaki people fought alongside the French against the British. The Abenaki people and the French had already established communities together and intermingled cultures for several decades previous to this, which is one of the aspects of this story that I found personally very, very fascinating. Bruchac is a PhD historian of Indigenous histories and cultures, and I think he does a really good job of illustrating the complexities of this village's society through the eyes of this 14-year-old boy, and illustrating where lines had started to become blurred in terms of who was considered a member of the tribe. You have characters who were colonists that were previously captured and then adopted into the tribe, and they have made the personal decision to stay, to make families within the tribe. They and their children have been accepted and embraced into the tribe, and they are fearful with this attack of what it might mean to be captured by British soldiers and taken back to white society. During the British attack on his village, Saxo's mother and sisters are captured and taken hostage, and so he sets out on a journey in order to track them down and bring them home. While doing so, he uses the knowledge and traditions that would have been widely available to Abenaki people of this time, which for the reader provides a really clear and interesting snapshot of what Abenaki culture and traditions were like during this time. This is the kind of book that I would have absolutely eaten up when I was in the target age range for middle grade, a character my age on a journey or tackling a problem, using the knowledge and skills of their day, their culture, in order to complete their task. In some ways, this kind of reminded me a little bit of the Dear America Diaries that I adored when I was younger. The story itself is very engaging, but is also in many ways very subtly informational. I felt like I learned a lot from reading this book. This book definitely doesn't shy away from depicting and discussing the brutality of the attack on the Abenaki village from the British soldiers and the violence that the tribe in general is facing from British colonizers. Overall, I had a great time with this book, and I definitely think that 14-year-old me would have absolutely adored it. Next up, let's talk about The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This book actually surprised me, and I didn't expect to end up liking it as much as I did. I know that this is a beloved coming-of-age story for many that is often taught in American schools, but I myself was never exposed to it growing up, so this was my first time reading it as an adult. Ponyboy, our protagonist, recently lost both of his parents in a very tragic car crash, and his eldest brother has foregone going to college in order to work and do his best to try and keep his family together, his two younger brothers with him in the same house. They often struggle to make ends meet and also try their best to fly under the radar so that social services doesn't get wind of their situation and split up the family into foster homes. Ponyboy and his brothers all run with a greaser gang made up of a group of young men that all stick together, have each other's backs, which most of them need living on the rougher side of town and often coming from broken homes. And because they're greasers, are often the target of brutal muggings from the high school boys on the other side of the tracks, other side of town that is more affluent and well-to-do. Thankfully, I didn't know much about the plot of this book going into it. I just sort of knew the general atmosphere of it following a gang of greaser boys, but I found that in reading it and actually listened to the audiobook of it, that the events and the characters in the story were surprisingly very raw. It's a coming-of-age story for a boy who has been sort of pushed to the outskirts of society, that is often looked down on for where he comes from, his social and financial situation, and the people that he, at the end of the day, calls his brothers and have his back. Violence is a means of survival in this world, but also in many ways is a form of intimacy. A la Derek Anderson, you construct intricate rituals that allow you to touch the skin of another man. It's an intimate and brutal look at a group of boys who are struggling to make their way through the first stages and years of manhood, trying to figure out what that means, and often in the process molding themselves into this archetype of a macho man greaser, a kind of character and armor that they wear in order to move through the world and feel like nothing can touch them. The boys in this book face multiple kinds of violence, whether overt from muggings and beatings to the quieter, more subtle kinds, such as poverty, social ostracization, to falling into the hole of what we might today call toxic masculinity, of feeling like you have to control your emotions and never show them in order to have a sense of strength and power that defines your manhood. Looking at it from a modern lens, this story and these characters feel like a snapshot and an expose of the expectations of masculinity and patriarchy during this time period, but also in general. It's not perfect, and there's definitely a take or two in this book that I think modern readers might raise their eyebrows at, but at the end of the day, the story and the message that this book delivers is very hard-hitting, that every human we meet, no matter how different, has inherent value and a story that's worth telling. So from here on out, all of the books that I'm going to discuss were 5-star reads for me. All of these books were excellent. Starting off the 5-star category, we have Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. Am I the last person to this party? I know this book has been quite popular and well-read for several years now, but I'm just now getting to it. Convenience Store Woman is a striking look inside the life and the mind of someone who feels and is in many ways alienated from society. Kiko, our main character, has never really fit in even from a young age. She doesn't understand the unspoken rules that society operates by, the social cues that society expects her to inherently know or pick up on, and punishes her when she doesn't. Though it's never explicitly stated, Kiko definitely feels like an autistically coded character. At age 18, she takes a part-time job at a convenience store and finds a place where she finally feels like she has purpose and her presence is positive rather than harmful or making people uncomfortable. All of the likely social interactions that happen in the store have been prescribed an appropriate response from the associate in the employee handbook. And so finally, Kiko has a place and a guide for how to move about the world and operate and interact with other people. And over the years, the customers and the needs of the store become second nature to Kiko. While her family and friends are really happy for her that she found a job initially, as the years go on, they start to worry more and more loudly to her that there must be something wrong with her if she's staying in this low-paying retail job, not progressing her career, not dating, not getting married, not having children. This book is a really stark take on the social expectations for women in Japanese society, but also I'd argue at society at large, what people see as the quote-unquote normal path that someone's life should take, but mostly a woman's life, and how someone can be treated if they end up deviating from the socially acceptable norms that are laid out, when they don't conform, when they don't fit in. Even though I'd heard a lot about this book before reading it, I ended up still really enjoying it. The ending felt very poignant and satisfying to me. Next, I'm going to talk about Spellbound by Allie Therin. This is her debut novel. I listened to this audiobook when my brain was in a silly, goofy little mood, and it was definitely the dose of serotonin that I needed in that moment. This is a male rodents. This is a male-male romance set in an alternative, fantastical New York City in the 1920s. Rory, who is a psychometric, has the ability to read the history of an object by touching it. There are other magical abilities that exist in this world, but Rory's is one of the most rare and one of the most coveted. But his gifts have been a source of a lot of personal pain and trauma in his past. So when our story starts, he is working undercover in an antique shop, dating artifacts for clients and working behind the counter and not really showing his face to many of the people that come in. Arthur Kinsey has no magic of his own, but he works with a number of people who do in tracking down supernatural relics of great power that, if they got into the wrong hands, could do a lot of damage. Arthur has recently come across what is possibly a relic, and so he seeks out Rory in order to help him verify this, figure out the nature of the relic, its power, and what can be done to destroy it. Rory, though, isn't willing to help. He is not willing to put himself out there and potentially sacrifice the small semblance of safety and calm that he has clawed his way to in his current living situation. Because of how people with his powers are often treated by others, he is very hesitant to trust anyone, and so a lot of the story and the romance is about the building of trust between these two characters. The story and the romance in this book were so much fun. I was really rooting for the couple in this book. There is definitely a grumpy and sunshine dynamic going on between the two. I also adored the alternate fantastical 1920s setting. I'm finding that I'm very much a sucker for historic urban fantasy. I thought that this was a really great debut from the author, and I will definitely be checking out more of her books. Next, let's talk about A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood. This definitely caused a stir when it was first published in 1964. It shocked many for its frank, sympathetic, and very moving depiction of an openly gay man in midlife who is grieving the death of his longtime partner. The book follows George, a 58-year-old English expat who teaches literature at a local California college, who has been devastated by and is in the process of grieving the sudden death of his longtime partner Jim, alienated from Jim's family, not really being allowed to come and attend the funeral of his love. This novel is set over the course of a day where George is moving through the hours and through a sort of existential funk, being haunted by the memories of Jim. George teaches literature at a local college and uses a Huxley novel to expound his views about society's outsiders to his students. The book itself is a very poignant and forensic snapshot of LA during the early 60s, with America in the grip of the Cuban Missile Crisis, everyone being scared that atomic war was coming, as well as being a snapshot into the mind of a middle-class white gay man who in many ways can pass in straight society but still feels this undertow and sense of alienation from the people around him. The inner monologue of George is written in an almost stream of consciousness way. It's wry, sardonic, suddenly manic. It's often quite funny and surprisingly bittersweet in many moments. Isherwood's writing is glorious and had me sucked in from the first page, and I will definitely be checking out more of his work. Next, let's talk about a literary horror novella that I read, Come For Me With Apples by Catheryn and Valente. Catheryn and Valente is an author that I've read in the past and really enjoyed, and I think this is her latest book. In this book, Valente plays with, twists, and subverts a number of aspects of the tale of Bluebeard, as well as the Christian creation myth with Adam and Eve. Sophie, our main character, exists in a world that is perfect. She has been made in a body that is perfect, and has a life and a relationship that are reportedly perfect. She is constantly insisting to the audience that her life is perfect, that she wants for nothing, but the reader starts to see an unsettling sort of thread being slowly pulled harder and harder as the story unravels. This narrative definitely stands as a critique of patriarchy, of the male gaze, and the threat that female autonomy and agency pose to those institutions. Valente's writing, as always, is lush, sharp, twisted, and rich. Next on the list, let's briefly talk about Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawlor. I did a whole dedicated review on this book, which I will link in the cards up above if you would like to see more of my thoughts on this book. In short, I adored it. I was blown away by it. I've never read anything like it. To give you a bite-sized little summary of this book, Paul Polydorus is a queer shapeshifter moving through the punk and queer subcultures of the early 90s, chasing intimacy and acceptance from a society that is continually trying to put him in a box. This to me read like a queer fever dream. It was sharp, it was funny, it was hypnotic, and entirely engrossing. This is definitely a new favorite for me, and I will be picking up a copy of it after my no-buy year. And last but not least, let's talk about Christmas Days, 12 Stories, 12 Feasts for 12 Days by Jeanette Winterson. This is a short story and essay collection that feature 12 bold and imaginative holiday tales interspersed with 12 personal essays, reflections, and recipes from Jeanette Winterson herself. This is going to be an occasion where if you're able to get your hands on a copy of the audiobook, I would highly recommend doing that. The voice actor who narrates the short stories does a phenomenal job, and Jeanette Winterson herself reads the personal essays that are interspersed in between all of the stories. Personally, I adore hearing authors read their own work, and honestly, Jeanette Winterson could read me her grocery list, and I feel like she would find a way to make it entertaining and enjoyable. The tales themselves are filled with a sense of childlike wonder and magic, along with some spooky, otherworldly tones that harken back to Charles Dickens and the old tradition of sitting around the fire during wintertime and telling ghost stories. I took this audiobook with me on a series of winter walks, and it was the perfect companion for that. I was also glad to be mostly alone and in the woods when I was listening to some of these stories, actually a lot of these stories, because there were several occasions where I teared up, needed to take a moment. I would highly recommend this book for anyone who celebrates Christmas in whatever capacity, either religious or not. I adored every minute of this audiobook, and I think I might need to make it a tradition where I listen to it year after year around Christmas time. But that is it, my friends. We have come to the end of the wrap-up. We have come to the end of the year. I'm in the midst of a few books at the moment. If I end up finishing any of them before the end of the year, they will be in a reading wrap-up for January, but I'm not in any rush. I'm enjoying taking my time and kind of savoring some of the things that I'm reading at the moment. But I hope you all are doing well and staying safe and healthy, and you have a lovely New Year's. I'm really grateful for everyone who has subscribed to the channel this year. I've really loved talking to all of you in the comments, and I've had a blast making these videos. So here's to more 5-star reads in the new year, and also more videos. There will be more videos. I think I need to wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, feel free to give it a thumbs up. That helps. And I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.